Welcome to another episode of the Millennials and Community Podcast. Why do we do this to ourselves? After a night on the town, join Matt and Carlo as we discuss the 30's party playbook, the reason why we still party, why it's beneficial both personally and professionally, and how if you still enjoy a night out, you can survive the next day. Thank you for being part of our community. Good morning, everyone. I don't know if you're listening to this in the morning or not, but it's the morning here. And if you've listened to episode number 12, you'll understand that in the great smartness that is Matt and I, we decided to book a hotel room, record a whole bunch of episodes so that we could somehow fit partying and being productive podcast hosts into one weekend. Matt also decided a pitcher of tequila margaritas was a good idea last night.
Whether or not Matt decided this seems like...
Matt decided, you ordered it.
Seems really convenient to blame me in the morning.
I never ordered tequila.
Mm-hmm. That's why you dragged me into a bar that features tequila.
I dragged no such person. Anyways, welcome to another episode of the Millennials and Community Podcast. I'm Carlo. That is Matt. And we're both doing great today.
Doing real great and really, really excited. It sounds like I'm going to have to carry the energy for all of us.
I'm here. We're good.
But it does really speak to what this episode about. We're not just complaining about our evening for the sake of complaining. We're actually going to talk about this in the episode.
Yes, we are. So today's episode is all about adulting and partying. I think the words you used here is the 30's party playbook. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's worth discussing, right? Because I think that for a lot of people are going to be able to relate to the idea that when we get into our 30s, we love the idea of going out and partying and doing the thing. And then the next day is like, was that a good idea? And then the next weekend it's like, is that going to be a good idea again? So, you know, as people who are very excited about the idea of going out, being in spaces with a lot of people and just feeling the energy and the music and things like that. Yeah. That would be a good opportunity to debrief that in an episode.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's super intriguing and again, a little bit unique to the millennial culture because, well, we're going to get into it. So let's start off with some icebreakers here. Matt, can you share a story that while you were out partying, you felt just old? You felt like maybe this wasn't the right place or activity for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for those of you who aren't watching this on YouTube and who are listening, and maybe those of you who haven't met the two of us in person, I do pride myself in looking youthful for my age. At least that's what I keep telling myself. Well, this was the night that it all went sideways on me. Went to the bar with some of my friends from the gym. And we had gone to a club. It was one of the more popular clubs here in Calgary, and hadn't been there in years. And it was very evident by the average age, I suppose, probably didn't change. It's just my average age that changed. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So we go in and we're going onto the dance floor to have a good time. And out of nowhere, this guy reaches across his friends, grabs my arm, as if he knows me, and he grabs my arm and he looks me dead in the eye. He's like, "Hey, really good to see." And then he freezes, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and I don't know this dude, and he's realizing very quickly he doesn't know me, and he looks at me and he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were my friend's dad." And I had a very quick choice to decide whether the next step was the bar or to leave. So that was my moment when I felt real old.
Fair.
Yeah. How about you?
I don't think I have any sort of one particular moment. And we'll get into this a little bit more in the episode, but like I spent a very large chunk of my partying years, my 20s, not partying. And not for, any particular reason other than that just wasn't what was going on in my life at that time. And you and I weren't terribly close. So my main partying influence was not calling me up all the time. So, being now in my 30s and partying fairly often, it's almost like I'm reliving a little bit of that 20s. But the thing that always makes me feel old, you're out, you're talking to people, you're meeting new people, the conversation will inevitably steer to, well, how old are you? Right? Because you're out at a club, so you're not really going to be meeting a whole bunch of people your age, right? Especially if you're at like Stampede and Nashville North, it's a younger crowd.
Sure.
So you're talking to these people, maybe it's a friend of a friend or something. Well, how old are you? And you can never just say, oh, I'm 33, right? You got to be like, well, guess. Because you want them to say something like, I don't know, you look 27. Well, aren't you a sweetheart? So it's always just a kind of an interesting thing to me because they have to point it out. And to most people's credit, when they find out that you're in your 30s, they're never going to be like, oh my God, you're so old. But you can kind of see it on their face where they're like, oh, I didn't anticipate that, you being 33. So I also think I have a very youthful feature set.
Yeah. Doesn't feel very youthful this morning, though, does it?
It doesn't.
So, we wanted to talk about this, and I thought it would be an interesting episode for a number of reasons. I mean, again, as Carlo pointed out, we both really, really enjoy going out. And really quick before I forget, because I wanted to bring it up later, but you queued it up really nicely. When we talk about the age of people that you tend to bump into on a night out, one of my close buddies calls it the Y2K test. If he's trying to figure out how old somebody is in the other way around,
sure,
he'll ask them what they did during Y2K, and if the person stares at him blankly, he knows that they're too young to be speaking to and to move along.
There's a lot of things like that when it comes to the millennial generation, like the save icon on like Microsoft Word. We all think of it as a floppy disk because we know that's what it was. Yeah. But it's just the save icon now.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I think this is an interesting topic for sure because Stampede ended, beginning of July. So it's been a little bit over a month now since Stampede ended. And for those of you that don't know what the Calgary Stampede is, are you living under a rock? No. The Calgary Stampede is, what our city likes to call the greatest outdoor show on earth.
It's where all the cowboys and cowgirls and all the land come to... No, it's not that at all. People are routinely surprised to find out that it's actually not just a gigantic hangout for all of the horses in the world.
Yeah, like to the credit of the Calgary Stampede, it is genuinely like a show. We have... barrel racing and horseback riding and all sorts of equestrian activities, and it's very country themed. It's one of actually the largest horseback competitions in the world, and it awards these great prizes, and there's some really amazing talent that comes. But the extension of that is it's party central for 2 weeks, right? Like Calgary practically shuts down. Downtown Calgary becomes a party haven. There's music festivals and tents all over the place. It's a really great time. And it is an excuse for, regardless your age bracket, to kind of let loose a little bit, especially here in the city. People come from all over the world. So, as we kind of explore this topic, it's this idea of, you and I in specific, and a lot of other people in the millennial age bracket, don't necessarily need these special events to go out. But when a special event does come along, it's just that more reason to like get out of the house and go. And, with us kind of being this, we keep using the word in between age bracket. Well, there's a lot of things in the millennial life that are different from previous generations, it seems. Like you look at our ages, and I don't have many friends that are our age that have, that are married and have kids. It's more of a rarity nowadays. So if you don't have kids and you just have a spouse or a girlfriend or a significant other, the idea of going out and for a party is a lot more accessible.
You've got the disposable income, you've got the disposable time, you've got more of that accessible to you, sure.
Yeah, and the thing that I find really intriguing about it is that just because we're still going and partying doesn't mean that we don't have all of the other fulfilling aspects of our life. Like it almost, society would have you believe, well, if you're still going out and partying, you probably don't have, other hobbies. You probably don't have a busy, successful career. You probably don't have this. Well, that's not true for our generation, right? We can have really cool hobbies and still go out and pretend like we're in our 20s and drink too much tequila because Matt thought it was a good idea. and have fulfilling lives, but just find so much joy in pretending like we're still in our 20s and in our party phase, right?
So there's a couple of different avenues that I want to take this, that I want to talk about. Because I don't want this episode just to be about us kind of like defending why we like going out so much. Like that's not what this episode about. So, but before we kind of dive in onto some of the components of this, I guess maybe let's start out with like, what is it that you like about going out? Because, you know, there's a lot of people in our social circles that are our age. They're like, ugh, like, I'm just so done with it. Yeah. I'm over it. So, like, tell us about what it is that is attractive to you about going out. And when we say partying, just to be clear, kind of the way that we think about partying, we're talking about going like dressing nice, going downtown, maybe having a nice meal, having some drinks, going to bars that have a dance floor, DJ, loud music, lots of people. That's kind of the vibe. I know that partying can have different connotations, so just to be clear, that's what we mean when we're talking about partying. So what is it to you that really draws you to that kind of an atmosphere?
Sure. Like, I'm a social butterfly. I like being the loudest, most vivacious person in the room. And that's really easy to do when you're at a house party or you're over at a friend's house and, you know, having a good time. But it presents kind of a unique opportunity / challenge when you're out in a room full of a whole bunch of people you don't know that are just as loud and crazy as you are. So to me, it's this opportunity to be a little bit more outgoing than I normally am, if you can believe it. It's also an opportunity to meet new people and just kind of really enjoy the idea of like, I don't know anything about this person and everything is new and exciting. They could say the smallest little thing about themselves and it's just a completely new trip to kind of learn that thing. So for me, that's a really big part of it. It's never really been about the drinking. It's never really been about the dancing. That's much more your realm, right? Not to say I don't enjoy it. For me, it is all about the activity of going and just being around other people and knowing that at any point in time you could start a conversation with someone that you've never met and have that lead into a good time.
It's interesting that you say that, because I agree, but you know, again, like you alluded to, I kind of have a different sense of it. I just love being in an atmosphere with a lot of people. I could go out, not talk to a single person that I've never met and be like super thrilled about how the night goes, so long as there is good music and somewhere for me to move my body, right? Like, I love getting to go places where I can go and move and dance. And I used to think that I was doing it to kind of show off. But I've kind of realized now that I just genuinely love doing it. Like, I will go somewhere just to move, just to dance. When I was a little bit younger, one of my friends who's also a very, very big proponent of dance, we used to go to a specific bar in Calgary that has country line dances right at midnight. So we'd show up to the bar at 11:50, we would walk in the door, go straight up to the stage, dance the line dances for half an hour, turn around, leave the bar, go home. Like, this is kind of didn't talk to a single person except for the doorman or the person taking our cover, and then we'd leave again. And so, you know, for me, it's just getting the opportunity to be out, similar to you, in an atmosphere with a lot of people. But interestingly, like, other people don't factor into why I enjoy it as much.
Yeah, and that's very different for me. I don't feel like the night was as fun if I didn't meet someone new.
Ooh.
Right? So if that's what you like about partying, what's something you dislike about partying?
So obviously, like, hangovers aside, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the hangover is definitely the hard part of it. I think that, I think for me, what I like least about partying is kind of the aftermath, and not the hangover, because that kind of goes without saying, but there's always a point in time where, in your sleep deprived state, the next day or a few days after, you think, okay, you know, was whatever money I spent, whether it was $10 on one drink or several drinks or whatever, was the money that I spent like worth the time that I enjoyed, you know? So that's kind of one component of it. Are there things that I'm missing out on being productive on a Saturday or a Sunday that I otherwise would have been able to do, right? Like, is my going out coming at the expense of being more productive and being able to do other things, as opposed to just being like a vegetable on the side of the couch or the bed for the whole next day. And that's regardless of the drinking, so you just get so tired.
Yeah, if you're out until 2 a.m., regardless, you're going to be tired the next morning.
Yeah, so I think those are the things that I struggle with about it. That kind of like value judgment of like, was it good enough of a night? Mm-hmm. What about you?
Well, and I want to kind of clarify this by saying every time that I go out is not an excuse for me to get blackout drunk, right? I feel like I handle my liquor pretty well. There are many times that I'll go out and, have a few drinks and be perfectly fine. However, and this does happen more often with you than most people, there is sometimes these times where you drink just a little bit too much, and you don't do it intentionally, but a round of shots shows up and you just drink a little too much. And my number one hated thing is not fully remembering what happened the night before. And there's a story behind this, some deep-seated trauma. When I was in high school, over the age of 18, I went to my first football party. So I was, in like whatever grade I was in, the senior football team invited the junior football team to go out for a party. And this was my first time ever as a young teenager going out and partying, and I had a little too much. And the next week at school was very awkward because apparently I had done something that made a girl feel uncomfortable. Now, I want to be very clear. I did nothing terribly bad. It was that I'm a large human. She was a tiny human. And I think we like bumped into each other and it made her afraid of me. And nothing beyond that happened. But I did not remember this. And that terrified me because I felt so bad making this girl uncomfortable and then having to like deal with the repercussions. And all the repercussions is everybody telling me, oh, you got a little too drunk and you bumped into this girl and you made her upset. But I felt so bad about it. So anytime I go out and I have a little bit too much to drink and I don't know exactly what happened throughout that entire night, I feel almost scared that I might have done something and made somebody feel uncomfortable or, made myself look bad in some way. So to me, that's my most hated thing. I really don't like not being fully accountable for who I was. Because when you hit that point, you just don't know. Like I even said to you this morning, I was like, was I just a lush last night? And you're like, no, you're fine. Right? But to me, that's probably my most hated thing.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And it's interesting how we like take those moments from our past. We reflect on how they enter into things now. One of the things that I think a lot about, I'm not really sure how to kind of reconcile these things, but one of the things that I get the opportunity to do professionally is lead and run parties. And so I think what kind of draws me to a party atmosphere is the fact that to some degree, this is what I do professionally in terms of like emceeing and, hyping up, motivating parties. And so I kind of sometimes have a hard time with the idea of this is what I do professionally. And so is the value of me going out and doing it personally something that I find fun? Is this some like weird, twisted professional development thing, which we're going to talk more about in a future episode here soon? But I think that there's just so many components to this. There's a lot of people, I kind of like hear my dad in my head saying like, well, maybe it's time to grow up and stop doing those things. But I think that there's more to it than that. And I think that, it's just an important part for me in a lot of the things that I do. But I recognize too that it is something that will probably change as we continue to get older.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for me, one of the big values I find in this is that it is a divergence from the norm for me. So, you think about all of the regular responsibilities that you have the day-to-day kind of, I go to work, I come home, I hit the gym, I do this, right? To go out and dance on a dance floor and meet new people, or, you know, go to a music festival or whatever it may be, is outside of the norm. And to me, it's very recharging. As tired as I may be the next morning, as much as I may not like, you know, how much or how little I drank or whatever it may be, I can always look back on it and go, well, that was an opportunity for me to let loose a little bit, have a little bit of fun, spend some quality time with some good friends, meet some new people. It's very recharging, but I don't need it all the time, right? And it's kind of funny because, you know, a month or two could go by without going out and partying, and I'll be like, I need to go out. I need to go party. I need to go have some fun, because that recharge needs to happen every so often. And I think it's really cool to kind of have that in your back pocket, because it is very attainable. Is it expensive? Yes. But you can go out and not spend a whole bunch of money on drinks and still have a good time. Yeah. Right? So it's something that's really attainable and allows you to kind of recharge and relive maybe a little bit more of your youth. And that, to me, I think is why it has a lot of value and significance, even at, you know, whatever age you may be.
So that's interesting. So that actually like kind of brings us in a little bit of a wide skirting way, I suppose, back to one of our previous episodes on escapism, right? And this is another example. I think we probably touched on it a little bit in that episode, but how important it is to recognize what some of these outlets are that we have. And it won't be partying for everybody, but again, taking the opportunity to recognize if it's an outlet for you, and then looking for opportunities to appropriately include it in your life, right? I think that that's really, really important. From a millennial standpoint, and again, this is kind of not necessarily relevant to millennials as much as it is relevant to the age bracket that we kind of find ourselves in as millennials right now. You know, we do have more of those responsibilities. You know, some of us may still like going out, even if we do have families and kids, etc. So there's the responsibilities, there's work, there's families. You know, I guess what I'm getting at is, how do you manage the next day? Because I kind of talked a little bit about part of my next day routine is the like existential dread of like, did I have fun enough to justify the things? So like, how do you balance the next day and the responsibilities that you have?
So this is definitely something that's changing for me rather quickly. So for the longest time, it did not matter how much I drank, I would not get hungover. And I don't know if that was just the luck of the draw with my genetics. Apparently my dad was the same way, but it literally, I could drink to the point that I didn't remember a single thing the night before and wake up and hit the gym and be perfectly fine. In fact, I saw something on social media the other day. It was like, if you want to meet, you know, other people that are, you know, good quality, responsible people and that take care of themselves, go to a gym on a Sunday morning at 8 a.m. because you know those people weren't partying the night before. Meanwhile, there's been many a time, like we went to Mexico in November last year, and we would party, and I would wake up and go to the gym while you guys were all still asleep, right? But as I've aged here, it is becoming more profound, the idea of, you know, having a hangover. And, you know, it may not present itself as extremely as it may for like our friend Kyle, right? But, you know, I've got a headache right now, and I'm tired and, you know, a little bit queasy. And other than that, I'm perfectly functional, but I'm definitely not feeling my best to go out and tackle the world. And coming to that kind of realization has made me very much think about, well, do I have anything super important tomorrow that I'm going to be limited by this, you know? So not to say that recording a podcast episode isn't important, but this is something I can arguably do while sitting here drinking a Gatorade and not feeling 100%. But you have to be very aware, especially if you are someone that's hit hard by hangovers and whatever it may be, that if you have a responsibility the next day, you got to call it early. You got to be more conscious about what you're drinking. And for those people that have young kids or family obligations that require their full 100% attention, like the idea of running around after a toddler today, I'm not interested in that. That's would not go well, right? So I think that limits a lot of people too. Maybe they do want to go out and have a lot of fun, but they can't because they have that responsibility. So you have to be aware of it and then kind of be able to gauge your own ability to move forward, right? With whatever it is you need to do after you've gone out.
Yeah, and I think I agree, and I think that for me, the biggest change is just the plan, right? And I think that it becomes such an important thing to have a plan for what things are going to look like. And so whether that means I'm really, really front-end loading the first half of my weekend, knowing that I've got plans to go out and getting that to-do list done, those errands ran, those sorts of things can be really, really important. But the friends of mine that have families and young kids that still enjoy going out, it's just a scheduling challenge, right? Like, it's not that it is not doable, but it's something that there's much more intention that needs to be put into making those plans. And it's I find that at least for me, gone are the days where we can say, all right, we're going out tonight, like, I'll meet you there. It's, what are you doing next weekend or in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks? And just like everything else in my very, very nicely curated calendar, going out has to become part of that too.
Yeah. And I think there's also a bit of a pregame to it as well, because when you're younger, you're much more willing to kind of go with the flow that the night gives you, right? Like, you're not so much really deciding how much you're going to drink. You're just kind of drinking them as the drinks show up. Where when you're older and you have a responsibility for whatever the next day, you kind of make that decision at the beginning of the evening. This is going to be a night where I maybe have 2 drinks, or this is going to be a night where I'm going to call it at 10 p.m. and not drink anymore and start thinking about a way to get home. So you got to pre-make that decision about how far this night is going to go. So obviously in a scenario such as this, where we have this hotel room to fall back on at whatever time and then ability to sleep in about the next morning, we kind of said last night, let's start pre-drinking, let's have a good time and go wherever the night takes us. But you just don't have that opportunity all the time, and you have to be conscious enough to make that decision prior and then hold yourself throughout the night to it.
Yeah. Which can be hard to be that disciplined.
Oh, for sure.
So I think that kind of covers us on the millennial side. The community side, I think there's a bunch of different places that we can go. A couple of things that I'm interested in chatting about. One is kind of the professional aspect to this, right? Like, not so much in the way that we're talking right now, but a big part of the way that a lot of industries function, whether it be the expectation of networking or happy hours or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a lot of professional expectation that kind of gets looped into partying. You talked about during Stampede that there's a huge corporate party culture, and a lot of air quotations work gets done, whether it's the cocktail napkin deals or whatever. So there's kind of that aspect that I'm interested in talking a little bit about. Sure. There's also the cultural aspect. I mean, we've done enough traveling between the two of us to know that Canada really has a really poor party culture compared to the majority of the world. And so it's fascinating to me to think about how this conversation is very culturally relevant. So which one of those, like, and maybe there's others, but like, of those two, is there one that you want to like comment on or give your thoughts on first?
Yeah, like, let's start with the professional networking, because that's something that I do fairly often. And, I think that there's a lot of fun to be had in getting to know people and being around people in a professional way while still partying and enjoying a good time. Because, again, you go into those kind of scenarios with a very different mindset. You're like, hey, I'm going to have a couple drinks and I'm going to meet some new people, but you are very much focused on how many people can I talk to, or can I talk to that particular person that I've been, trying to form a relationship with in this professional way that normally isn't accessible to you, right? Because the moment you're all holding a drink in your hand and you're, in a ballroom full of people after an event, it's like all boundaries are gone in terms of, can I go talk to that person, right? Sometimes the hardest part is just, there are several people talking to him. I'm going to have to somehow make my way in there. But that's really cool, because otherwise he may not ever have an opportunity to get that person's phone number and call them to ask this question, but you can just walk over there. You're in the same room. So that's something that is really neat. And, you know, there's no other meeting going on. There's no other person talking, taking away the attention. You can just walk up and be like, hey, Matt, my name's Carlo. I've been wanting to meet you for a while. This is how I know you professionally, right? And I think that's really, really important. And for a lot of people, their careers don't have a networking aspect, right? That's not really something that they need to move forward in their vocation. But even if you don't have that requirement, I think that everybody's professional career could be expanded upon if they took it upon themselves to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree. Regardless of what industry you work in, the opportunity to familiarize yourself or get to know people that are in a similar sector and maybe doing different work, or maybe doing the same work in a different sector, kind of whatever that is, it gives you the opportunity to learn, potentially gives you different career moves or opportunities to branch out in the future. There's certainly lots to be gained.
It can open up resources for you.
Yeah.
Right? You know, sometimes you're talking to a person and they're like, oh yeah, I'm working on this right now. And you're like, I could use that.
Yeah.
Right? And you maybe didn't have access to that before.
I also think too that in a lot of industries, I think about working in the recreation and parks sector, a lot of folks, particularly in recreation and to a lesser degree parks, but people tend to be very, very outgoing. And so in the professional circles that I run in, that sort of an atmosphere is really conducive to building relationships. I will say, and I do want to acknowledge that this sort of networking can be really, really challenging for people who are more introverted. Not to say that introverts are not capable of networking. It just kind of by default takes more energy to do it, and kind of takes more out of them to participate in that sort of a thing. So I think that in this regard, people like you and I are certainly more, we're luckier to be extroverts, because there tends to be, we tend to be better set up for success in that sort of an environment when it comes to networking. So,
well, I was going to ask you, have you ever been to a dedicated networking event? Like, yes.
Yeah.
What was it, a dry event?
Some yes, some no.
Okay. Because to me, I think there's kind of a distinction to make there, especially when we're talking about somebody that isn't as outgoing and extroverted, is that they do have these, you can Google them and you'll find them very easily, these networking events. And there's no drinks to be had there. It's people that you don't know that could be across a varying degree of professions. And I will say, even as an extrovert, those are difficult, right? Because you have nothing really, to your knowledge, in common with this person. You have to very much be like, I'm going to go over and just talk to someone, right? And you walk over and you go, hi, this is me. This is what I do. And you kind of try to find something to bond over. Those are really, really hard to do. And then you'll have the networking events where it's like, everybody's got something in common, or, there was a little bit of a preface to it that you know something about that person to get the conversation started.
Yeah.
And those are so much easier, right? Just because starting that conversation is so much less daunting. But either way, whether you look at this as a networking event or just going out partying with a friend or whatever it is, starting that conversation with someone you don't know is the hardest part about all of this, but it can be also the most rewarding, right? And I'm not saying that everybody you meet is going to be absolutely great, but there's a good chance that you're going to meet somebody throughout whatever event that you're at and get to know something new and have a little bit of fun and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's interesting that you say that, and I completely agree. I think that knowing or going and doing kind of a cold style of introducing yourself to someone you don't know is a really daunting thing. You're right. It's maybe a bit easier for people who are extroverted, but even so, it's hard. I think that, it's obviously kind of skirting the issue, but I think the easiest way to learn how to do that better is to know more people. And that sounds a little bit, tongue in cheek. But what I mean by that is every time you go to one of these things and you kind of meet somebody and you hope that they're there at the next one, and then they can help you introduce somebody. Yeah. And right. So there's kind of a domino effect. I do a lot of work with kind of my team on how to network, and I could do an entire episode solely on networking strategies, but we won't go that far. But I think that what was interesting is your comment on dry event making it more challenging, you said, when it's dry, right?
I think the initial approach, getting over that hump of I haven't talked to anybody yet, I should go start,
right,
is a little bit harder when you don't have a little bit of liquid courage.
Sure, the social lubricant. Yeah, and I think that for me, as somebody who also hosts a number of these types of events, it's really how it's facilitated to try to create that safe space, that comfortable space for people. I've ran networking events like the ones we're talking about with and without alcohol, and alcohol is just one of many tools that you can use to try to create that sort of space. And I think that too often people use it lazily as kind of the only thing, like, oh, we're going to give everybody a drink ticket, and that's the only thing that they're going to need to be able to socialize with one another. And it's not. Like, you need more than that. You need to provide the means to create an atmosphere, right? And bars and nightclubs do this with music, right? Like, but it can't just be the alcohol. There has to be other ways in order for this to work out well. I would say too that I find that people have a tendency in that sort of a partying setting to show you who they really are, and whether that's kind of the alcohol take away people's inhibitions or whatever it might be. I find that from a professional standpoint, it's useful for me to get to know somebody in that way, because I can learn a lot about somebody from how they interact in those sorts of environments. And that's irrelevant of alcohol to actually.
Sure.
But just you get a good sense of like how people treat other people, how people compose themselves when things are an inherently stressful environment, because as much as any setting where there's a lot of people is a higher stress environment, no matter what kind of fun you're having. And so I find that professionally it's interesting because I get the opportunity to learn a lot about people by how they interact in those spaces.
There's also something to be said when you see somebody that's really good at networking, really good at, starting conversations with people. That's a very admirable trait, right? Especially in a professional setting. You're like, look at that person just being able to walk over there and, get down to business and meet that person and start talking about whatever. And I think it's kind of important to acknowledge that that's a skill set that can be improved upon.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Like I said, I could teach courses in this.
And I think that's really cool because there's a lot of things about being social that are not a skill. They're not something that can be improved. They're not something that can be learned. It's just the roll of the die of what kind of person you are. But the idea of thinking that I can go out and I can have more fun on a night out. I can meet more people that will help me move forward personally and professionally. I can, go and be viewed more favorably in my community if I develop this skill set. Like, there's a lot of really good reasons to become a good networker and a good social butterfly, right? And some people that are introverts might be listening to this and going, that sounds terrible. I never want to do that. My challenge to you is get over it, right? Do your best to try and meet new people in a setting that you feel comfortable in, because there are so many more advantages to it than disadvantages.
And I personally, and this is just stylistically you and me, I wouldn't say get over it. I think it's important for people, regardless of our level, because, again, we're going to naturally play to our own strengths. And so it's very easy for you and I to say, we are extroverts, therefore we have these strengths, therefore my strengths are the best strengths, therefore you should get strong at what I'm strong at, right? But what I think, everybody has to use the tools that are available to them. I think what I would agree with is that it's important for everybody to find a way to feel comfortable in that sort of a setting, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be hard.
Of course.
Right? Like my director, if you met her, you would think that she is the most outgoing person you ever met, but she hates every minute. You know damn well that like anytime she's in a social situation where there's more than 5 of her closest friends, she's absolutely miserable inside. But she does such a good job of like being in that environment constructively and being able to achieve kind of whatever sorts of like expected professional outcomes are there. And I think it's really important not to just like get over it, but just to understand how you can interact in that setting. Because I think that you're right. Most people are going to be able to advance their career, advance their social setting by participating in these ways. And in that way, yes, our kind of the way that we think about work and networking and industry is skewed towards people that are extroverted. Again, that's another thing we could do a whole episode about. Yeah. But I think from a partying standpoint, yeah, there's definitely something to be said for using socializing and going out as a way of practicing something that you may or may not already be comfortable doing. And it's flexing this muscle that may have benefits to us professionally.
Yeah, for sure. So there are going to be other people, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier, that this is a way they grew up, right? Culturally speaking, family speaking, having these get-togethers is a constant thing.
Yeah.
Right? So is there a particular story or some, anecdote that you want to share that you've noticed about a particular culture or a place that you visited that really kind of drives that point home?
I think really, like, when it comes down to it, what I've learned is that Canadian party culture is actually some of the weakest in the world. Yeah. At least in the world that I've had the chance to travel. I by no means have been everywhere. But, culturally, I think that I've certainly had the most experience with Latin cultures. Central American, South American, even Spain, to some degree. And so that's kind of the most experience that I get drawn from what I understand. And you could speak to this more. Some of the Asian countries that we would typically think of as having more like straight-laced, buttoned-up cultures. I think of Japan. I'd love to hear your take on this. My understanding is that Japan has like a raging party culture that basically people like leave work, they get slammed, and they do this like multiple times a week. So I'd love to have you talk about that. But for me, like, I think that really it's the Central American, the South American culture, where music is such a deep-seated part of their culture. And then, by extension, dance becomes a really, really critical part of the culture. And then, naturally kind of partying is just the next add-on. I had the opportunity to DJ a wedding for a couple of friends recently, and half of the family, or the family for one half of the wedding, was Venezuelan, and so there is a couple of older brothers of the groom, or probably in their 60s, and they were the ones that were the most active in the party and the dance floor, to the point where they kept coming up to me asking if I would turn up the volume, right? It's just so much fun to see how different cultures, and it was the same, older brothers of the groom saying, why is the party shutting down? It's only midnight, it's only 1 a.m. Why is the party shutting down? And so it's so interesting to me how I think that it stems from a cultural from cultures that have a deep-seated connection to music. I think that's where it starts. And I think music turns to dance, turns to partying, and that's kind of culturally how a lot, at least that's my assessment of at least Latin cultures. What about you? Japan kind of is where I led you, but where would you go in terms of?
Well, what I was going to say is, Italians tend to socialize over food, right? So as a kid, and I was actually talking to my mom about this yesterday. She's like, hey, next weekend, we're going to have this person over and this person over and this person over. It's not, we're going to have one person over. It's we are literally going to have 10 people come over, and my mom, loves you to death through food. Literally, she's killing me. But her idea of loving you is providing you with as much food as you could possibly imagine. And then her version of joy is to have all of these people around her, around this table, enjoying her food, right? So I think that every culture definitely brings something unique to the table, quote unquote, that is going to help facilitate these, partying environments. And I think that's really cool. To speak to Japan, I don't want to go too deep into it, but there was two major things I noticed that I thought were really cool. Is you are right. There was many times that you could tell the person, like we went to, so Akihabara is like a place in Tokyo that it's just like a little party town. It's got all the anime, it's got, gambling, it's got arcades, restaurants, it's a really cool place. But you would see these people still in their work suit. So like I'm talking a tie, white shirt, black pants, because that was for the most part what everybody wore if you were a man working, that had their ties like tied around the back of their head as sweatbands, and they're playing Dance Dance Revolution. And he still had his work briefcase. And from what I understand it, they would leave work, get a bite to eat, and go to the arcade and play as late as they possibly could, go home before the train shut down, go to sleep, wake up, go to work. And that would be their Monday to Friday. Every day, right? But the other thing I really noticed and I thought was unique about Japan is that it feels like the vibe of everybody instantly changes on the weekend. So Monday to Friday, yes, they go out and they have fun. I'm not saying this is everybody. We just noticed a lot of it. But on the weekend, everybody dresses differently. They smile more. You can hear laughter where you hear almost no laughter. Like if you're on the subway in Tokyo, it is dead quiet Monday to Friday. But on the weekend, you'll actually hear people talking, which is like apparently kind of a no-no. You're not supposed to talk on the train, but you'll still hear them be kind of jovial and have some fun. So it was really cool aspect to kind of see how they, deal with their weeks and the stressors of work, but then completely shift over on the weekends, recharge, and then go back to work the next week. Right? Okay. So, we've talked about partying. We've talked about why we enjoy it. We talk about why it might be something that is beneficial in both a professional and a personal setting. Let's say somebody's going, man, I used to party all the time. I want to keep doing it. I have these challenges in my life. How do you fit that back into your life in a productive, in a beneficial way that, if you haven't had it for a little while? Without overdoing it, because that's what some people do. Is they never do it, and then they overdo it, and they hate it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we've kind of touched on all of these things kind of throughout the course of the episode, and I think all of these are probably really good points or tips, I suppose, regardless of whether we're talking about like going out on the weekends or even professionally networking in some sort of a bar or event setting. I think these things are important. I think the first one is make a plan, right? Like there needs to be, I know it kind of sounds ridiculous that you need to like be really strategic with your nights out, but I think that there's a couple of pieces to making a plan. It's understanding like, what do I need to get done today before I do this? What do I need to get done tomorrow? How am I going to get it done tomorrow if I feel terrible? Like just making the plan, being strategic about it. The second piece is like giving yourself grace. Like I think that, again, regardless of whether you're incredibly extroverted, incredibly introverted, being in these settings where there are a lot of people and it's very, very stimulating, whether it's music, lights, people, and it's an environment that is inherently stressful. It might not like feel negatively stressful, but it's definitely raising the stress profile. So you need to recognize that, give yourself grace and let yourself rest the next day. No matter how much you do or don't enjoy it, it's a tiring environment, and it's really important that you don't feel guilty for the time that you need to recover. whatever that looks like for you. We talked about like being honest with yourself, knowing your limits, understanding if you've got something to do the next day, and kind of planning accordingly. And then I think one that I didn't initially intend on talking about, but I think that you brought up a really important point. And you and I experience so much privilege by being men of a certain size, that it's so important to like know and trust who you're with.
Yeah.
Right. And like, again, you and I have the privilege that if we were so inclined, we could go to a bar or a nightclub in probably 75% of the world by ourselves on any given night, and we would walk away completely fine.
We wouldn't have to be concerned for our safety.
And a lot of people do not have that privilege. And so I think it's really, really critical to be able to trust the people that you're going out with, because again, as much as these are opportunities for a lot of fun, there is a safety element to this that is really, really important too. And so I think that those would be my 4 points: making sure you have a plan, giving yourself grace, being honest about what you need and what's going on for you, and then being able to know and trust the people around you.
Yeah, I like that. I would say there's kind of two things that I want to drive home is we live somewhat in this world where it is frowned upon to be someone who's a little bit older and still going out and partying, right? Like, you know, you can be made to almost feel guilty because you still go out and do this. And why you didn't get that out of your system in the 20s, eh? Right? Like, and I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of. I think if this is something that you enjoy, go and do it. Get what you get out of it for whatever purpose you find joy in it. That being said, point number 2 is also be conscious of the reasons that you're doing it, right? Like we've talked a fair bit about consuming alcohol. That is a bad vice for a lot of people. And, you know, we've managed, or I feel I have managed to have it be a part of my life that is not in a hindrance, but a lot of people struggle with it. So if that is something you struggle with, then you need to be very conscious of that. If you party too much and it's causing issues in your life where you can't maintain relationships, or you're having a hard time professionally, or it is negatively impacting you being, you know, not feeling well the next day, you need to call yourself on that.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, we're talking about the benefits and why we like it and think this is cool and encouraging other people to do it, but it's not for everybody because it can be bad for people if they don't know how to do it responsibly.
Great point. Right. And we and maybe we're remiss in not talking about the responsible and the safety elements as much as we could, but I think that's a wonderful thing to drive home. And you know, one of my closest friends doesn't drink anymore, and you wouldn't know it by the amount of fun that he's able to have. And so just know too that like anybody out there who might think that alcohol is kind of a requirement or a prerequisite to having a good time, it doesn't have to be. And just know that like you're with the right people if you're not going outside of the bounds of who you want to be when you're out with them.
Yep. So I think as we kind of bring this to a close, I want to head into my gratitude, and it very much extends from last night, because this morning we rolled over and, you know, good morning. And I said, thank you for getting me home, because I don't remember how we got here. So it was that kind of night, folks. I'm not proud of it, but hey, it happened. So that really extends to this idea of like being really comfortable and feeling safe with who I was with, because whenever we go out, regardless of how much we do or do not drink, I always know that I'm going to get home safe when I'm with you. And I don't really have to worry about that, because yes, I'm a big person and, you know, not many people are going to mess with me, but there is always the possibility that I end up going into the wrong place, or someone realizes that I'm maybe not all there and decides to take my wallet or my phone or something. And I don't have to worry about that when I'm out with you. And I know I'm still going to have a great time, and that I'm very, very appreciative of.
Thank you. I am really grateful to you as well for one, following me around whenever there's like harebrained schemes to be had. And that, just to be clear, is by no means me admitting fault for this thing that I get accused of, like, oh, whenever you're with Matt. It's not true, folks. It's not true. Whatever you hear, it's not true. But in all seriousness, I'm one of the things that I think is a lot of fun is just like getting the chance to experience these little moments when you're out. And in the course of a night, there's always these little moments where there's just like fun little, I don't know what the like opposite of a core memory would be, but there's these little puzzle pieces that fit together. And I find that when I go out and when we get to go out together, there's these little like tiny micro memory moments that like, to me, just like create such a fun macro memory of almost like a mosaic of all the times that we get to go out together. So thank you for being a part of all of those memories with me.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Let's keep doing them.
Love it.
All right, folks, it's another episode of the Millennials and Communities podcast. We hope that this was a fun little ride and you can see the pain on some of our facial expressions right now and you can live through that. We encourage you to go have fun. Do in whatever way that you can think of, whether that's going out and partying or sitting at home watching a movie, whatever it is, go have some fun, experience some joy, meet some new people, and we'll see you again.
Take care, everyone.